Watch where you're going, you clumsy old woman! Those words still echo in my mind. I fell hard on the marble floor at my daughter-in-law's birthday party, and instead of helping me up, she laughed. But what I discovered afterward, and the action I took, left my entire family in shock. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please follow my story until the very end, and comment below what city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Rose Thompson, and at 70 years old, I never imagined I'd be treated like trash by my own family. But here I am, about to share with you a story that still makes my hand shake when I think about it. A story about betrayal, humiliation, and ultimately, about finding strength I didn't know I still had. Let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand how I ended up on that marble floor, surrounded by broken glass and cruel laughter. I was born in 1953 in a small town called Willow Creek, about 2 hours north of where I live now. My childhood was simple but filled with love. My parents owned a small hardware store, and they taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and family above all else. Those lessons shaped everything about who I became. When I was 22, I met Robert Thompson at a church social. He was handsome, kind, and worked as an electrician. We married within a year, and by the time I was 25, we had our son, Daniel Robert Thompson. Those early years were the happiest of my life. We didn't have much money, but we had each other, and that felt like everything. Then, when Daniel was only 8 years old, Robert died in a workplace accident, a scaffolding collapse at a construction site. One moment I had a husband and Daniel had a father, and the next moment our entire world shattered. The insurance payout was minimal. Robert's company fought us on every detail, claiming negligence on his part, which wasn't true, but I couldn't afford lawyers to prove otherwise. I was left with a small settlement, a mortgage on our modest house in Maplewood Heights, and a young son who cried himself to sleep every night asking for his daddy. I did what I had to do. I took a job cleaning office buildings at night, 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., 6 days a week. During the day, I worked at Dorothy's Diner on Elm Street, serving breakfast and lunch shifts. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, sometimes less. My body ached constantly. My hands were always raw from cleaning chemicals and hot dishwater. But I never complained, not to Daniel. He was just a child who'd lost his father. The least I could do was make sure he never felt the poverty that threatened us at every turn. I made sure he had clean clothes for school, even if they came from thrift stores. I made sure there was always food on the table, even if I sometimes skipped meals so there would be enough. I made sure he could join the soccer team, go on school field trips, have birthday parties with his friends. Daniel was a bright boy, smart, determined, and ambitious in ways I'd never been. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and business classes. His teachers told me he had real potential, that with the right opportunities, he could do something significant with his life. I was so proud of him. Every good grade, every achievement, every step forward felt like validation that my sacrifices meant something, that the endless exhaustion and financial stress were worth it because my son was going to have the life Robert and I had dreamed of for him. When Daniel was accepted to Westfield State University with a partial scholarship, I cried tears of joy. I took out loans to cover what the scholarship didn't. I picked up extra shifts at the diner. I sold Robert's old truck that I'd been keeping in the garage for sentimental reasons. Whatever it took to make sure Daniel could go to college and not worry about money. He studied business administration and real estate development. He called me every week during those college years, telling me about his classes, his friends, his plans for the future. I hung up the phone and sit in my quiet house, exhausted from my double shifts, and feel like the luckiest mother in the world. After graduation, Daniel got a job with Riverside Properties, one of the largest real estate development firms in the state. He started as an assistant project manager, but he was ambitious and smart and worked his way up quickly. Within 5 years, he was a senior developer, overseeing major commercial projects. That's when he met Vanessa. Vanessa Christine Montgomery came from a completely different world than ours. Her father, Richard Montgomery, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. Her mother, Patricia, came from old money, some ancestor who had made a fortune in shipping in the 1800s. Vanessa had grown up in a mansion in Riverside Estates, attended private schools, summered in the Hamptons, and had never worked a day in her life until she decided to play at being an interior designer for wealthy clients. Daniel brought her to meet me about 3 months into their relationship. I remember that day so clearly. I'd cleaned my entire house until it sparkled, made a roast with all the trimmings, put fresh flowers from my garden on the table. I wanted to make a good impression on this woman my son was clearly crazy about.
Vanessa walked into my small house in Maplewood Heights like she was entering a museum of poverty. Her eyes swept over my secondhand furniture, my outdated kitchen, my walls decorated with family photos and mismatched frames. I saw her nose wrinkle slightly when she sat on my sofa, as if she was afraid it might contaminate her designer jeans. "So, this is where Daniel grew up?" she said, her voice carefully neutral but her meaning clear. "This is where you raised him, in this shabby little house?" "Yes," I said, proudly, refusing to feel ashamed. "We had some wonderful years here. Every room has happy memories." She smiled tightly and said nothing. During dinner, she picked at her food, complimented nothing, and spent most of the meal telling stories about her own family, their vacation home in Aspen, her mother's charity galas, her father's business success. Everything was designed to emphasize the vast difference between her world and mine. Daniel seemed oblivious to the tension. Or maybe he just didn't care. He was so besotted with her, hanging on her every word, laughing at her stories, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. After they left that night, I sat at my kitchen table, feeling a cold knot of worry in my stomach. Something about Vanessa felt off. The way she looked at Daniel, the way she emphasized her family's wealth and status, the way she treated my home, and by extension me, with such thinly veiled contempt. But I told myself I was being paranoid, being an overprotective mother. Daniel was happy, and that's what mattered. They got engaged 6 months later. The wedding was at the Montgomery estate, a lavish affair that must have cost more than I'd earned in the past 5 years combined. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue number I'd bought at Macy's on sale, and felt completely out of place among women dripping in diamonds and designer labels. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive carpet. During the reception, she asked me loudly in front of other guests, "So, Margaret, what do you do?" in a tone that suggested she already knew and found it distasteful. "I'm retired now," I said, which was partially true. I'd had to stop working the night cleaning job due to arthritis in my hands, though I still picked up occasional shifts at Dorothy's Diner when they needed extra help. "Oh, how nice," Patricia said with a frozen smile. "Daniel is so fortunate to have such a simple upbringing. It's made him appreciate the finer things in life all the more." The insult was clear, even though the words were dressed up as a compliment. I smiled and excused myself to the bathroom, where I stood in a marble stall that was bigger than my bedroom and tried not to cry. After the wedding, Daniel and Vanessa moved into a stunning house in Riverside Estates, the same exclusive neighborhood where Vanessa had grown up. The house was massive, at least 4,000 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a gourmet kitchen with appliances that cost more than my car, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Mom, isn't it amazing?" Daniel had said when he first showed me around, his arm around Vanessa's waist. "We got such a great deal on it. The market was perfect, and with my connections at Riverside Properties and Vanessa's design eye, we're going to make this place incredible." I smiled and nodded, but privately I wondered how they could afford it. Even with Daniel's good salary and Vanessa's family money, this house seemed beyond their means. But I didn't ask. It wasn't my business, and I didn't want to seem like a meddling mother-in-law. Over the first year of their marriage, I tried to maintain a relationship with them. I'd call Daniel every week, just like I had during his college years, but the conversations grew shorter, more distracted. He was always busy with work, with Vanessa's social commitments, with renovations on the house. I'd invite them over for Sunday dinners at my place, that tradition we'd maintained for years, but they always had excuses. A party with Vanessa's friends, a charity event, a couple's spa weekend. Always something more important than spending time with me. Instead, I was expected to come to them, to their house on their schedule, and increasingly to help with things. Mom, could you come over Thursday and help me organize the garage? Vanessa's having people over on Saturday and we need the space cleared. Mom, we're having a dinner party next week. Could you come early and help with the prep work? You're so much better at that kind of thing than the caterers. Mom, Vanessa's overwhelmed with her design projects. Could you combine help with some deep cleaning? The regular cleaning service doesn't get into the corners like you do. Every request chipped away at my dignity a little more. I wasn't being invited as a mother or a guest. I was being summoned as free labor. But I went. Every time I went. Because he was my son, and I'd spent 70 years learning that mothers sacrifice for their children. That's just what we do. Vanessa's treatment of me grew progressively worse. The little comments became more frequent and more cutting. Margaret, that hairstyle really ages you. Have you considered something more modern? Those shoes are so practical. Don't you ever want to wear something with a little style? You know, there are programs for seniors who need help with their appearance. I could get you some information if you'd like. Each comment was delivered with a smile in front of Daniel, who would laugh nervously and say nothing in my defense. The worst part was watching my son transform. The kind, thoughtful boy I'd raised was becoming someone else. Someone who measured worth in money and status. Someone who seemed embarrassed by where he came from.
One particularly painful incident happened about 6 months before Vanessa's birthday party. I'd stopped by their house unexpectedly, something I rarely did, but I'd been at a doctor's appointment nearby and thought I'd drop off some homemade cookies. I rang the doorbell, and Vanessa answered with an expression of clear annoyance. "Margaret, we weren't expecting you." "I know, dear. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. I just wanted to bring these cookies for you and Daniel." She took the container without opening it or thanking me. Daniel's on a work call in his office, and I'm actually in the middle of something, so I got the message. "Of course, I'll just say hello quickly and then—" "Actually," Vanessa interrupted, "it would be better if you didn't disturb him. These calls are very important. Why don't you just leave the cookies, and I'll tell him you stopped by." I stood there on her front porch, on my son's front porch, feeling like a door-to-door salesperson being dismissed. "Could you at least tell him to call me when he has time?" I asked quietly. "I haven't spoken to him in 2 weeks." Vanessa's expression shifted to something that looked almost like pity, but crueler. "Margaret, you have to understand that Daniel is building a life now, a real life with real responsibilities. He can't be calling his mother every day like he's still a child." The words stung, but what hurt more was the kernel of truth in them. Daniel wasn't calling me. He wasn't making time for me. And when I tried to reach out, I was increasingly treated as an inconvenience. I drove home that day and cried for an hour in my driveway before I could even go inside. But I kept trying. I kept calling, kept accepting their invitations to help with their parties and events, kept showing up whenever they needed something. Because he was my son, and I couldn't give up on him. I couldn't accept that I'd lost him to this world of wealth and status and people who measured human worth in dollar signs. Which brings me to the night that changed everything. 3 weeks before Vanessa's 35th birthday party, Daniel called me with the invitation. "Mom, Vanessa's having a birthday party on the 15th. It's going to be pretty fancy. She's invited about 60 people, mostly her design clients and some of my business associates. We'd love for you to come." My heart lifted. An invitation, not a request for help, but an actual invitation to attend as a guest. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What time should I arrive?" There was a pause. "Well, actually, we were hoping you could come a bit early, around 5:30. Vanessa could use some help with the setup, and you're always so good at that kind of thing." And there it was. Not a guest. Help. I should have said no. I should have told him that I deserved to be treated better, that I was his mother and not his employee. But old habits die hard. Of course, I heard myself say. I'll be there at 5:30. Great. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Those words, "you're the best," echoed in my mind for days afterward. Once upon a time when Daniel was young, those words meant, "You're the best mother, the best person. I'm so lucky to have you." Now they meant, "You're useful. You do what we ask without complaining. Thanks for being convenient." I spent those 3 weeks before the party trying to decide what to wear, what to bring, how to approach the evening. I settled on a modest dress from JCPenney, black with a subtle floral pattern, and decided to make Vanessa's favorite dessert, lemon cake with buttercream frosting. I'd made this cake for Daniel's birthdays when he was growing up. It had been his favorite, and he had once mentioned that Vanessa loved lemon desserts. I thought it might be a nice gesture, a way to show that I was trying to connect with her, to be part of their life in a meaningful way. The morning of the party, I baked the cake from scratch, my kitchen filled with the scent of lemon and sugar, and for a moment I was transported back to happier times. Daniel as a little boy sitting at the kitchen table, watching me bake with wide, excited eyes, asking, "When can I lick the bowl?" I decorated the cake carefully, piping delicate buttercream rosettes around the edges, writing, "Happy birthday, Vanessa," an elegant script across the top. It wasn't professionally done, but it was made with care and love. I hope that would count for something. At 5:15 p.m., I put on my dress, checked my appearance in the mirror one last time, noting the gray roots I couldn't afford to have touched up, the wrinkles that seemed deeper every year, and the way my hands had become garled with arthritis, and drove to Riverside Estates with my homemade cake carefully secured in the passenger seat. The drive from Maplewood Heights to Riverside Estates was only about 20 minutes, but it felt like traveling between two different worlds. My neighborhood was full of modest ranch houses with chain-link fences and gardens that people tended themselves. Riverside Estates was all sprawling properties with professional landscaping, iron gates, and houses that looked like they belonged in architecture magazines. I pulled up to Daniel and Vanessa's house at exactly 5:30. The circular driveway was already filling with catering vans and a truck from Elegant Affairs event planning. I parked my 2008 Honda Civic behind a Mercedes van and felt a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over me. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The house was a whirlwind of activity. Young people in black uniforms were setting up bars and food stations. Someone was arranging massive bouquets of white orchids that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Classical music was playing softly from hidden speakers throughout the house. Everything looked like something from a magazine spread. Perfect, polished, expensive. I stood in the foyer holding my homemade cake, suddenly feeling foolish. What was I thinking, bringing a homemade dessert to an event like this? I should have known better.
Margaret, Vanessa's voice came from the top of the sweeping staircase. You're here. She descended the stairs like a model on a runway, wearing a form-fitting emerald green dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in an entire year. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless, her jewelry sparkling in the chandelier light. She was beautiful. There was no denying that. And I, in my JCPenney dress, with my gray roots and arthritic hands, felt like a dust mote in comparison. "Happy birthday, Vanessa," I said warmly, holding up the cake. "I made your favorite, lemon cake with buttercream frosting." Vanessa's eyes flicked to the cake, and I saw her expression shift. It was subtle. Someone who didn't know her well might have missed it. But I'd learned to read her micro-expressions over the past few years. Distaste, pity, condescension. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "How homemade. That's very sweet of you, Margaret. Sweet. The way you'd compliment a child's crayon drawing. Well, I know you love lemon desserts, and I thought..." "It's really thoughtful," Vanessa interrupted, taking the cake from my hands. But the caterer brought a professional dessert display. Macarons, petit fours, a chocolate fountain. You understand, this is a sophisticated event.
She handed the cake to a passing young man in a black uniform. "Could you find somewhere to put this in the kitchen? Maybe the staff can have it during their break." The staff. My homemade cake, made with love and care, relegated to being eaten by the hired help during their break. I felt my throat tighten, but forced a smile. "Of course, whatever you think is best." Vanessa turned back to me, her eyes scanning me up and down in a way that made me feel completely exposed. "Since you're here early anyway," she said, her tone shifting to something more businesslike, "I could really use some help. The caterer is wonderful, but they don't understand my vision for the napkin presentation. I need them folded in a specific triangle shape with the monogrammed side showing. Would you mind?" Would you mind? As if it were a request instead of a command. "Of course," I heard myself say, because what else could I say? "Wonderful! The napkins are in the dining room, and there are about 80 of them. I need them done before guests start arriving at 7. Oh, and Margaret." I turned back to look at her. "Maybe after that, you could check the powder room. Make sure there are enough hand towels and the soap dispensers are full. You know how guests can be." And just like that, my role for the evening was established. Not guest. Not family. Help. For the next hour and a half, I folded napkins. 80 linen napkins, each one needing to be creased in precisely the right way to create the triangle shape Vanessa wanted, with the embroidered V visible on each one. My arthritic fingers ached after the first 20, but I kept going. While I folded, I watched the transformation of the house around me. The caterers set up elaborate food stations, sushi, carved meats, artisanal cheeses, caviar service. The bar was stocked with premium liquors and champagnes I'd never heard of. The string quartet arrived and began setting up in the corner of the living room where a baby grand piano sat gleaming. Vanessa floated through it all like a queen surveying her kingdom, adjusting a flower here, repositioning a candle there, her voice rising whenever something wasn't exactly to her specifications. Daniel appeared briefly around 6:15. He was wearing an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the successful businessman. He walked right past me where I sat folding napkins and headed straight to Vanessa, kissing her cheek. "Everything looks amazing, babe," he said. "Your mother's here," Vanessa replied, gesturing in my direction as if I was a piece of furniture. Daniel finally looked at me. "Oh, hey, Mom. Thanks for coming early to help out." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. He was already turning back to Vanessa. "I need to finish up some emails before everyone gets here. I'll be in the office if you need me." And he was gone. 10 seconds of interaction with his mother, and then back to his important work. I finished the napkins at 6:45 and then, without being asked, checked the powder room as Vanessa had suggested. I restocked the hand towels, refilled the expensive soap dispensers, made sure the tissue box was full. All the tasks of a good housekeeper. By 7 p.m., guests started arriving, the house filled with people I didn't know. Couples in designer clothes, carrying expensive wine bottles, women dripping in jewelry, men discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes. The air filled with the kind of laughter that comes easily to people who's never had to worry about money. I retreated to a corner of the living room, holding a glass of sparkling water that I'd poured myself from the kitchen, trying to be invisible. I didn't belong here among these people who spoke a language of privilege I'd never learned. I watched Daniel work the room, his arm around Vanessa's waist, introducing her to people as my incredibly talented wife. He was good at this, the schmoozing, the networking, the performance of success. Vanessa had taught him well. Or maybe this was who he'd always wanted to be, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Around 7:45, I was contemplating quietly slipping out and going home when Vanessa's voice cut across the room. "Margaret!"
Every conversation stopped. Every face turned to look at me, standing in my corner with my glass of water. Vanessa was standing by the bar, her smile bright and artificial. "Could you be a dear and bring out more champagne from the kitchen? The bottles are in the second refrigerator, the one in the butler's pantry. I think we need at least 6 more bottles for the toast." The way she said it, not as a request to a guest, but as an order to staff, made my cheeks burn. But everyone was watching, and I couldn't make a scene. "Of course," I said quietly. I made my way through the crowd toward the kitchen, feeling their eyes on me. I heard someone whisper to their companion, "Is that the mother or the maid?" Followed by quiet laughter. The kitchen was at the back of the house, accessible through a long hallway with those beautiful polished marble floors that Vanessa loved so much. Floors that cost a fortune. Floors that were also, as I was about to discover, dangerously slippery. The second refrigerator was indeed in the butler's pantry, a room bigger than my entire kitchen at home. I found the champagne bottles, expensive French labels that probably cost $200 each, and carefully loaded 6 of them onto a silver serving tray. The tray was heavy, much heavier than I'd anticipated. My arms, already tired from the day's work, trembled slightly as I lifted it. I should have made 2 trips. I should have asked for help. I should have done a lot of things differently. But I didn't want to be more of an inconvenience than I already was. I carried the tray carefully down the hallway, my eyes focused on keeping the bottles balanced. The marble floor gleamed under the recessed lighting, beautiful and treacherous. I was about halfway to the living room when one of the bottles shifted. Just slightly, just enough to throw off the balance. I tried to adjust my grip, tried to compensate for the weight distribution, but my arthritic hands couldn't hold it. The tray tilted. My foot slipped on the polished marble, and then I was falling. Everything happened in slow motion and all at once. The bottles sliding off the tray, the crash of glass against marble, the cold splash of champagne, the sharp, searing pain as my hip hit the floor, as my wrist bent at an angle it wasn't meant to go, as shards of glass scattered around me. I lay there in a spreading pool of champagne and broken glass, pain radiating through my body, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not gasps of concern, not people rushing to help. Laughter. And Vanessa's voice, clear and cruel. "Oh my God! Watch where you're going, you clumsy old woman. This floor costs more than your entire house." More laughter rippled through the crowd of guests. I heard someone say, "Is she drunk?" Another voice, "How embarrassing for Daniel and Vanessa." I lay there on that expensive marble floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne, 70 years old and utterly humiliated, and felt something inside me break that was far more important than champagne bottles. My dignity, my last shred of hope that my son still loved me, my willingness to accept being treated this way. All of it shattered on that marble floor. Finally, Daniel appeared in my field of vision. He looked down at me, and the expression on his face is something I'll never forget. Not concern, not love, not even basic human compassion. Annoyance, embarrassment, frustration. "Mom," he hissed, bending down but not touching me, not helping me. "Seriously? At Vanessa's party? Can you just get up and clean this up? You're making a scene." Those words, "you're making a scene," as if I'd fallen on purpose, as if I'd deliberately humiliated myself at her wife's party for attention. I tried to push myself up, but pain shot through my wrist. My hip was screaming. I couldn't get my legs under me properly. A young woman in a black catering uniform finally broke through the crowd of onlookers. She knelt beside me, genuine concern in her eyes. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance?" "I'm fine," I managed to say, though I wasn't fine at all. She helped me to my feet, supporting my weight as I stood on shaking legs. My dress was soaked with champagne. My wrist was already swelling. Every movement of my hip sent fresh waves of pain through my body. Vanessa appeared, but she wasn't coming to check on me. She was surveying the damage to her precious floor. "Well, this is quite the birthday surprise." She turned to her guests with a theatrical sigh. "Margaret, maybe you should go home and rest. You've done enough for tonight." Done enough, as if I had been hired to work the party and had failed at my job. "There's a mop in the utility closet," she added, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow managed to be both sweet and venomous. "If you could just quickly clean up your mess before you go, that would be wonderful. I'd hate for any other guests to slip on your spill." I stared at her. She wanted me, injured, humiliated, in pain, to mop up the champagne and glass before I left her party. And Daniel said nothing, did nothing. He just stood there, his face red with embarrassment, but not for the way I was being treated. He was embarrassed of me, of his clumsy old mother who'd ruined his wife's perfect party. The young woman catering protested, "Ma'am, she's hurt. She needs to—" "It's fine," I interrupted quietly. "I'll take care of it." Because that's what I've been doing for 70 years. Taking care of things, cleaning up messes, making sure everyone else was comfortable, even at the expense of my own dignity and well-being.
I limped to the utility closet, every step agony, and retrieved the mop and bucket. While party guests stepped around me, some looking uncomfortable, some pretending I didn't exist, some still whispering and laughing, I cleaned up the champagne and picked up the larger pieces of broken glass. My wrist throbbed. My hip felt like it might be seriously injured. Tears streamed down my face, but I kept my head down so no one would see them. When the floor was clean enough to satisfy Vanessa's standards, I put the cleaning supplies away, gathered my purse from where I'd left it in the front hallway, and walked out the front door. No one said goodbye. No one thanked me for coming. No one asked if I was okay or if I could drive safely in my condition. I was simply gone. And they went back to their party, their champagne toasts, their celebration, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there at all. The drive home was dangerous. My wrist hurt so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My vision was blurred with tears. Several times I had to pull over to the side of the road because I was shaking too hard to drive safely. When I finally made it to my small house in Maplewood Heights, my shabby little house that apparently cost less than Vanessa's marble floor, I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could even get out of the car. Inside, I took some ibuprofen, wrapped ice packs around my wrist and hip, and sat in my dark living room replaying every moment of that horrible evening. But somewhere around midnight, as I sat there in pain and humiliation, something began to change inside me. The pain was transforming into something else, something harder, something that wanted answers. Because there was something that had been nagging at me for months, something about Daniel and Vanessa's lifestyle that didn't add up. Their house, easily worth $1.2 million in Riverside Estates, Vanessa's car, a brand new Mercedes G-Wagon, Daniel's Audi, the constant parties, the expensive clothes, the jewelry, the vacations to Turks and Caicos and Napa Valley that I saw posted on social media. Daniel made good money as a senior developer at Riverside Properties, maybe $150,000 a year. Vanessa's interior design business was supposedly successful, but she'd only started it 2 years ago. And while her family had money, I'd never heard them mention giving Daniel and Vanessa any substantial financial support. In fact, Vanessa's mother, Patricia, had once made a pointed comment at a family gathering about how young people today need to learn to make their own way without handouts from their parents.
So how were they affording all of this? The question had bothered me before, but I'd pushed to decide. It wasn't my business. Daniel was an adult. Maybe he'd made smart investments. Maybe Vanessa's business was more successful than I realized. Maybe they'd gotten an inheritance I didn't know about. But now, after the way they'd treated me, after being used and humiliated and dismissed, I had no reason to keep ignoring the questions that had been accumulating in my mind. Questions about money, about credit, about who was really paying for their lifestyle. And I had time to find answers, because after tonight, I had no intention of accepting any more invitations to help at their parties or clean their house or be their unpaid servant. After tonight, everything was going to change. I just didn't realize yet how much I would discover, or how far my son had fallen from the values I'd tried to instill in him. But I was about to find out. I didn't sleep at all that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Vanessa's cruel laughter echoing in my mind. I saw Daniel's face, not concerned for his injured mother, but annoyed that I'd embarrassed him. I felt the hard marble floor beneath me and the eyes of 60 strangers watching me lie there in a pool of champagne and broken glass. But more than the physical pain that radiated from my hip and wrist, more than the humiliation that burned in my chest, there was something else keeping me awake. A growing conviction that something was very wrong with the picture Daniel and Vanessa had painted of their perfect life. I'd raised my son to be honest, to work hard, to live within his means. Those were the values Robert and I tried to instill in him in those early years before the accident, and I'd reinforced those lessons throughout his childhood, even as I worked myself to exhaustion to give him opportunities. But somewhere along the way, Daniel had changed. Or maybe Vanessa had changed him. Or maybe, and this was the thought that hurt most, maybe I'd never really known who my son was underneath the surface. At 6 a.m., after a sleepless night, I finally gave up on rest and made myself a cup of coffee. My wrist was so swollen I could barely grip the coffee pot. The bruise on my hip had bloomed into an ugly purple-black stain that stretched from my waist to mid-thigh. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body. I should have gone to the emergency room the night before. I knew that. But the thought of sitting alone in a waiting room for hours, of having to explain to some young doctor how I'd gotten injured, of having to face the medical bills that would come afterward, it was all too much. So instead, I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where Daniel did his homework as a child, where we celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, where I opened his college acceptance letter with trembling hands and tears of joy. I sat there and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky outside my window in shades of pink and gold, when my phone rang. The sudden noise in the quiet house made me jump, sending a spike of pain through my injured hip. I looked at the caller ID. Daniel.
My heart did something complicated, a flutter of hope mixed with dread. Maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe, in the sober light of morning, he'd realized how badly they'd treated me. Maybe my son was still in there somewhere, underneath the expensive suits and the social climbing. I answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Mom. His voice was flat, carefully controlled, not apologetic, not concerned, just flat. We need to talk about last night. Yes, I said quietly. We do. Daniel, I was really hurt by... You embarrassed us. He cut me off, his voice sharp. Do you have any idea how that looked? Vanessa's clients were there, my business associates, people who matter to our careers, and you made a scene. I felt like he'd slapped me. I made a scene? Daniel, I fell. I was injured. I could barely walk, and Vanessa made me mop the floor before I could leave. You should have been more careful. His tone was dismissive, like he was explaining something obvious to a slow child. Those floors are expensive. Vanessa had them imported from Italy. Do you know how much it costs to install them? And now there might be staining from the champagne. I could have been seriously hurt, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. My wrist is so swollen I can barely move it, and my hip? Did you go to the hospital? Then it can't be that bad. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Mom, you're being dramatic. You fell down. It happens. What's not okay is refusing to clean up after yourself and making everyone at the party uncomfortable. I couldn't speak for a moment. This couldn't be my son. The boy I'd raised, the child who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared, who used to make me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings and misspelled words of love. That boy would never speak to me this way. Daniel, I finally managed, my voice shaking. Please, just listen to yourself. I'm your mother. I was injured at your house, humiliated in front of strangers, and you're worried about your floors? It's not just about the floors. His voice took on an edge of anger now. It's about respect. Vanessa opened her home to you, invited you to her birthday party, and you repaid her by causing a scene and making her look bad in front of her guests. She made me work the party like hired help. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. I folded 80 napkins, restocked bathrooms, served champagne like a waitress. She didn't invite me as your mother or as a guest. She invited me to work. She asked you to help out, the way family helps each other. But you can't even do that without complaining, can you? Family? Is that what we are? Because last night, I didn't feel like family. I felt like an employee who wasn't performing well enough. There was a long pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Vanessa, probably, coaching him what to say. Mom, I think we need to take a break from each other for a while. Vanessa is really upset about last night, and honestly, so am I. Maybe some space would be good for everyone. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're cutting me out of your life because I fell at a party? I'm suggesting we take some time apart because you seem unable to respect the boundaries of our household and the importance of the social connections we're trying to build. Boundaries. Social connections? The language of therapy and business networking, not of mothers and sons. I raised you better than this, I whispered. Your father and I taught you to value people over things, to care about character over status. What happened to you? I grew up, Mom. His voice was hard now, all pretense of patience gone. I built a life, a real life with real success. Not the small, struggling existence you had, and I'm sorry if that's difficult for you to accept, but this is who I am now. This is the life I've chosen. With Vanessa. Yes, with Vanessa. She's my wife, my partner. And if you can't respect her and the life we've built together, then maybe you're right. Maybe we do need to reevaluate what role you play in our lives. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that Vanessa was poison, that she was changing him into someone cruel and shallow. I wanted to remind him of every sacrifice I'd made, every shift I'd worked, every bill I struggled to pay so he could have opportunities I'd never had. But what would be the point? He knew all of that. He just didn't care anymore. Daniel, I love you. I will always love you. But I can't keep letting you and Vanessa treat me like I'm worthless. No one said you're worthless. His voice softened slightly, but it felt calculated, not genuine. We're just asking you to be more understanding of our situation, to be supportive without being difficult.
difficult. That's what I'd become in my son's eyes. Not a mother who deserved respect, just someone difficult who made his life harder. I need to go, I said, because I couldn't bear to hear any more. My wrist is really hurting and I need to ice it. Fine, we'll talk when everyone's calmed down. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling something crack inside my chest that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. My son had chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's love. He'd chosen expensive floors over my well-being. He'd chosen status and success over basic human decency. And I realized, sitting in my small kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the windows, that I'd lost him. Maybe not forever, but certainly for now. The Daniel I'd raised was gone, replaced by this stranger who measured worth in money and social connections.
I spent most of that day trying to process everything that had happened. I took more ibuprofen for the pain, though it barely made a dent. I tried to eat something, but couldn't stomach more than a few bites of toast. Mostly, I just sat and thought about the years I'd spent sacrificing for my son, and how little any of it seemed to matter now. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. From Vanessa. My stomach clenched as I opened it. Margaret, I wanted to reach out personally about last night. I'm very disappointed in how things went. Daniel and I have worked hard to build relationships with important people in our community, and incidents like what happened at my party make that very difficult. I think it's best if we establish some clearer boundaries moving forward. When we invite you to events, we expect you to be helpful and respectful, not create drama. I hope you can understand that. Also, the cleaning company estimates it will cost $800 to properly clean and reseal the marble floor after the champagne damage. We'll let you know if we need you to contribute to that cost. V. I read the message 3 times, each reading making me angrier than the last. She wanted me to pay for damage to the floor I'd been injured on while doing her bidding. She was framing my accident as creating drama. She was establishing boundaries that essentially meant I was only welcome in their home as unpaid labor. And she'd signed it V instead of Vanessa, as if we were business associates rather than family. I wanted to type back a furious response. I wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her cruelty, her manipulation, her transformation of my son into someone I barely recognized. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down and made myself another cup of coffee, thinking. There was something in Vanessa's message that struck me as odd. Not just the cruelty. I'd come to expect that. But the specific mention of money. The $800 for floor cleaning, the way she'd phrased it as if we need you to contribute to that cost, rather than just demanding payment outright. It was almost like she was testing me, seeing if I had money to extract, gauging my resources. Why would she care? Vanessa came from wealth, her family was loaded, and Daniel made a good salary. Why would $800 matter to them? Unless it did matter. Unless their financial situation wasn't as solid as they pretended. I thought about their house, the massive mortgage they must have, Vanessa's car. That Mercedes G-Wagon cost at least $140,000. Their constant entertaining, the expensive clothes, the vacations I saw posted on social media. Daniel made maybe $150,000 a year. That was good money, certainly. More than I'd ever made. But was it enough to support the lifestyle they were living? The mortgage on that house alone must be $7,000 or $8,000 a month. Add in car payments, insurance, property taxes, utilities, maintenance on a house that size, Vanessa's shopping habits, the constant parties and social events. The numbers didn't add up. They couldn't add up. So where was the money coming from? I opened my laptop, an old Dell that was slow but still functional, and started doing some research. I wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but I knew how to use Google and basic search functions. I started with real estate records, which are public information. I found the deed to Daniel and Vanessa's house, purchased 3 years ago for $1.15 million with a down payment of $230,000. Where had they gotten $230,000 for a down payment? Even if Daniel had been saving aggressively, that seemed like an enormous sum for someone in his early 30s. I dug deeper. Marriage records, business filings, anything public that might give me insight into their finances. Vanessa's interior design business, Lux Interiors by Vanessa, was registered 2.5 years ago. The business address was listed as their home address. I found her website, which featured beautifully photographed rooms and glowing testimonials from clients. But something about it felt off. The testimonials were generic, without full names. The portfolio of completed projects didn't include specific addresses or client information. It looked professional on the surface, but it had the feel of something that was more show than substance. I spent hours going down internet rabbit holes, piecing together fragments of information, social media posts, business reviews, property records, anything I could find. And slowly, a picture began to emerge that made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Vanessa had posted on Instagram about a major project she was doing for the Riverside Country Club, redesigning their women's lounge. The post had included photos of fabric swatches and paint samples, tagged with hashtag luxury design, hashtag commercial interiors, hashtag big project. But when I searched the Riverside Country Club's website and social media, there was no mention of any recent renovation, no photos of a redesigned women's lounge, nothing. It was all smoke and mirrors. Beautiful photos and exciting announcements that never seemed to lead anywhere real. Was Vanessa actually doing any interior design work? Or was the business just a facade, a way to appear successful and busy, while what was she actually doing? I thought about the financial pressure they must be under, the massive mortgage, the expensive cars, the constant need to keep up appearances in their wealthy social circle. And I thought about something else, something that had been bothering me for months, but I'd pushed aside because it seemed paranoid.
Last year, around Thanksgiving, I'd visited Daniel and Vanessa for dinner. While Vanessa was in the kitchen and Daniel was in the bathroom, I'd seen his wallet on the coffee table fallen open. Inside were at least a dozen credit cards. Not just 1 or 2 like most people carry, but a dozen. Different colors, different banks, all with Daniel's name on them. At the time, I thought maybe he was churning credit cards for points, or maybe he had business expenses he tracked separately. But now, looking back, it seemed like a red flag. Were they drowning in credit card debt? Was that how they were funding their lifestyle? I kept digging, searching for any public records of liens, judgments, or financial problems. I didn't find anything. They were clearly good at keeping up appearances, but the absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. By the time evening came, my head was spinning with questions and suspicions. I'd been sitting at my computer for so long that my injured hip had stiffened up completely, making it agony to stand and walk to the bathroom. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd discovered, or more accurately,
what I hadn't discovered: the gaps in Vanessa's supposedly successful business, the question of where their money was really coming from, the feeling that their perfect life was built on something unstable. I made myself a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, all I had energy for, and sat back down at my computer. This time, I searched for something different: credit card fraud, identity theft, financial elder abuse. The articles I found made my stomach turn. Stories of adult children stealing from elderly parents, of daughters-in-law manipulating family finances, of schemes where credit cards were opened in relatives' names without their knowledge. One article in particular caught my attention. It was from a consumer protection website titled "Warning Signs Your Family Member Might Be Stealing Your Identity." The warning signs included sudden interest in your financial affairs, offering to help manage your bills or accounts, having access to your personal documents, mail going missing, unexpected credit card statements or bills, being pressured to co-sign loans or credit applications. My heart started racing as I read through the list. Several of those warning signs felt familiar, but from a different angle. About 6 months ago, Vanessa had insisted that I get a new phone because my old flip phone was embarrassing when they had friends over. She'd taken me to the phone store, helped me pick out a smartphone, and set everything up for me. At the time, I'd been grateful. The new phone was confusing, and Vanessa had been patient teaching me how to use it. She'd even set up my banking app so I could check my account balances easily. But to do that, she'd needed my banking information, my account numbers, my passwords. I felt sick. A few months before that, Daniel had asked if I had a copy of my birth certificate and social security card. He'd said something about needing them to update his life insurance policy to make sure I was properly listed as a beneficiary. I'd given them to him without question, trusting my son completely. He'd returned them a week later, but had he made copies? What information had he taken? And then there was the mail. I'd been having trouble with my mail delivery for the past year. Important things going missing, bills arriving late, statements I never received. I'd complained to the post office multiple times, but they insisted there was no problem on their end. What if someone had put a forwarding order on my mail? What if Daniel or Vanessa were intercepting it? I felt panic rising in my chest. These were just suspicions, paranoid thoughts brought on by hurt feelings and the terrible events of the previous night. My son wouldn't steal from me. He might be cold and distant. He might prioritize his wife over his mother, but he wouldn't commit fraud. He wouldn't steal my identity. Would he? I thought about the way he'd spoken to me on the phone that morning. The coldness, the complete lack of empathy for my pain, the way he chose expensive floors over his mother's well-being. If he could be that callous about my physical injury, what else might he be capable of? I spent the next hour trying to calm my racing thoughts. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my hurt feelings cloud my judgment, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Finally, around 9 p.m., I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank and request a full accounting of all my accounts. I would check my credit report. I would see if there were any credit cards or loans in my name that I didn't know about. I would find out once and for all if my suspicions were just paranoid imaginings or if my son and his wife had been doing something far worse than just treating me poorly. But for tonight, I needed rest. My body was exhausted from the injury and the sleepless night before. My mind was worn out from hours of worry and research. I took more ibuprofen, wrapped fresh ice packs around my wrist and hip, and lowered myself carefully onto my bed. Even lying down hurt, but it was better than sitting. As I lay there in the dark, I thought about Robert.
My husband had been gone for so many years, but I still missed him every day. I wondered what he would think if he could see what his son had become. Would he be disappointed? Angry? Heartbroken? Or would he tell me I was wrong to suspect Daniel of something so terrible? Would he say I was just a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her son had outgrown her? I didn't know. All I knew was that something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what. Sleep came eventually, fitful and filled with uneasy dreams. I dreamed of falling over and over, but every time I reached out for help, the people around me just laughed and walked away. When I woke the next morning, it was 6:30 a.m. and my phone was ringing again. I grabbed it groggily, expecting another call from Daniel, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. A local number, but not one saved in my contacts. I answered hesitantly. "Hello? Is this Margaret Rose Thompson?" A woman's voice, professional and slightly concerned. "Yes, this is Margaret." "Mrs. Thompson, this is Sandra Williams from First National Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. We're calling because we've detected some unusual activity on your account, and we need to verify some recent charges." My heart stopped. "What kind of unusual activity?" "We show several large charges to your credit card over the past 3 months that don't match your usual spending patterns. The most recent was yesterday, a charge of $3,500 to a luxury furniture store in Riverside Estates. Can you verify that you made this purchase?" I felt the room spinning. "I don't have a credit card through First National Bank." There was a pause. "Mrs. Thompson, according to our records, you opened a Platinum Rewards card with us 4 months ago. The card was mailed to your address and activated shortly after. Are you saying you didn't open this account?" "I did not." My voice was shaking. "I've never applied for that card. Someone must have stolen my identity." "I see." Sandra's voice became more serious. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need you to come into a branch office as soon as possible so we can file a fraud report and investigate this. Can you come in today?" Yes. I'll be there as soon as they open." "We open at 9 a.m. I'm going to freeze that account immediately so no additional charges can be made. Do you have any other accounts with First National that we should check?" "I have a checking account and a savings account, but I've had those for years. Those are legitimate." "I'll note that in your file." "Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, do you have any suspicions about who might have accessed your personal information?" I closed my eyes, feeling tears leak from the corners. Yes, I do." "Family member?" "My son and his wife." Her sigh was sympathetic, but not surprised. "Unfortunately, that's more common than you'd think. When you come in today, bring any documentation you have, personal identification, proof of address, anything that might help us verify your identity and track down what happened." After she hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, my injured hip throbbing, my wrist still swollen, and felt something inside me harden into cold, focused determination. I'd been right. My paranoid suspicions weren't paranoid at all. Daniel and Vanessa had been stealing from me, opening credit cards in my name, making charges I'd never authorized, using my identity to fund their expensive lifestyle. They hadn't just humiliated me at a party. They hadn't just treated me like unpaid help. They hadn't just chosen status over family. They'd been committing fraud. They'd been stealing from me for months, maybe longer. And now they were going to face consequences. I looked at the clock. 7:15 a.m. The bank opened at 9. I had time to shower, get dressed, and gather all the documents I'd need. But first, I did something I should have done long ago. I took screenshots of Vanessa's text message about making me pay for floor damage. I saved all the research I'd done the night before. I started a document on my computer titled Evidence and began listing every suspicious thing I could remember. The credit cards I'd seen in Daniel's wallet, the phone set up with Vanessa, the borrowing of my personal documents, the missing mail. If they wanted to treat me like I was nothing, fine. But they were about to learn that even nothing could fight back. By 8:45 a.m., I was dressed in clean clothes, despite the pain it caused to move, had gathered my driver's license, social security card, bank statements, and any other identifying documents I could find, and was sitting in my car outside First National Bank, waiting for them to open. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the power that came from money or status or expensive houses, the power that came from knowing the truth and being ready to act on it. At 9 a.m. exactly, I walked into the bank, approached the customer service desk, and said the words that would set everything in motion. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I need to report identity theft and fraud. I believe my son and his wife have been opening credit cards in my name without my permission. The young woman at the desk looked up with concern and sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Mrs. Thompson. Let me get you set up with one of our fraud specialists right away." As I followed her to a private office, I felt something close to satisfaction. Daniel and Vanessa thought they were so clever. They thought I was just a clumsy old woman they could use and discard. They thought I'd never discover what they were doing. They were about to learn just how wrong they were.
The private office at First National Bank was small but professional. A desk, 3 chairs, and walls covered with financial service posters about protecting your identity and monitoring your credit. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat down across from Sandra Williams, the fraud specialist I'd spoken with on the phone. Sandra was a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She had a thick folder in front of her, and as she opened it, I could see printouts of what appeared to be account statements and transaction records. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice gentle but serious, "thank you for coming in so quickly. I've been reviewing your files since we spoke this morning, and I have to tell you, what I've found is concerning. Very concerning." My hands gripped the armrests of my chair. "How bad is it?" Sandra pulled out several sheets of paper and spread them across the desk between us. "Let's start with what we know for certain. 4 months ago, someone opened a Platinum Rewards credit card in your name. The application was submitted online using your social security number, date of birth, and address. The card was sent to your home address and was activated 2 days after it arrived." "I never received any card," I said, my voice shaking. "That's what we suspected. The activation was done online, which means whoever did this had access to both the physical card and enough of your personal information to pass our security questions." She pulled out another document. "Since that card was opened, there have been charges totaling $43,750. The number hit me like a physical blow. $43,000? Yes. The charges are primarily at luxury retailers, furniture stores, high-end restaurants, and vacation expenses. Whoever did this was living well on your credit." She showed me a detailed list of charges, and my eyes blurred as I scanned them. $3,500 at Riverside Luxury Furniture, the charge from yesterday that had triggered the fraud alert. $2,800 at Nordstrom. $4,200 at an upscale restaurant in Riverside Estates. $6,500 for a weekend stay at a resort in Napa Valley. $1,900 at a jewelry store. The list went on and on. Every charge was something I would never buy at stores I'd never been to, in amounts I could never afford. "But this isn't the only account," Sandra continued, her expression growing more grave. "When I ran a full credit check on you this morning, I found something much worse." She pulled out another stack of papers, and I felt my stomach drop. "Mrs. Thompson, there are currently 6 credit cards open in your name. 6. The total debt across all these accounts is $127,340. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt sideways. $127,000? A debt that would take me the rest of my life to pay off, and I hadn't charged a single dollar of it.
There's more, Sandra said quietly. 2 months ago, someone applied for a personal loan in your name through an online lender. The loan was for $50,000, and it was approved based on falsified income information. The money was deposited into a bank account that shares your name but is at a different institution, Riverside Community Bank. My vision was swimming. I don't have an account at Riverside Community Bank. I know. We've already contacted them and they're investigating on their end. But Mrs. Thompson, the total amount of fraudulent debt we have discovered so far is over $177,000. And given the sophistication of this fraud, there may be more that we haven't found yet. I felt tears streaming down my face. My entire life, I'd been so careful with money. I'd never carried credit card debt. I'd lived within my modest means. And now, through no fault of my own, I was somehow responsible for debt that exceeded what I'd earned in years of work. What do I do? I managed to ask through my tears. Sandra reached across the desk and gently touched my hand. First, you breathe. Second, you need to understand that you are a victim here. This is not your debt. We will fight this, and we will fix it. But I need you to be honest with me. You said on the phone that you suspect your son and his wife. Can you tell me why? Over the next hour, I told Sandra everything. The phone they'd bought me and set up with my banking information. The time Daniel had borrowed my birth certificate and social security card. The missing mail. The dozen credit cards I'd seen in Daniel's wallet. The expensive lifestyle they were living that didn't match Daniel's income. Vanessa's fake interior design business that seemed to be all show and no substance. Sandra listened carefully, taking notes, her expression growing more grave with each detail I shared. Mrs. Thompson, what you're describing is classic identity theft by a family member. It's actually one of the most common forms of identity fraud, and it's particularly insidious because victims often don't discover it until the damage is extensive. She paused. I have to ask, are you prepared to file a police report? Because that's what this will require. You'll have to formally accuse your son and daughter-in-law of fraud and identity theft. The question hung in the air between us. Was I prepared to do that? To potentially send my own son in jail? I thought about the way he'd spoken to me on the phone after the party, the coldness, the complete lack of empathy. I thought about Vanessa's cruel laughter as I lay injured on her marble floor. I thought about the years I'd sacrificed for Daniel, the double shifts and the exhaustion and the dreams I'd given up so he could have opportunities. And I thought about the $177,000 in fraudulent debt they'd saddled me with while living in their mansion and driving their luxury cars and throwing parties for their wealthy friends.
Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared to file a police report. Sandra nodded approvingly. Good. That's the right decision, even though I know it's not an easy one. Here's what's going to happen next. We're going to freeze all of these fraudulent accounts immediately so no additional charges can be made. We're going to file fraud reports with all 3 major credit bureaus. We're going to dispute every single fraudulent charge and work to get this debt removed from your name. And we're going to work with the police to build a criminal case against whoever did this. How long will all of this take? Honestly, it could take months, possibly longer. Identity theft cases are complex, especially when family is involved. But Mrs. Thompson, I want you to understand something important. You are not responsible for this debt. Under federal law, you're protected from liability for fraudulent charges. Yes, this will be a long and difficult process, but at the end of it, you should not owe a single penny of this money. The relief I felt at those words was overwhelming. I wouldn't be financially ruined by my son's theft. But the emotional cost, that was something no fraud protection could fix. Sandra spent the next 2 hours walking me through the process. We filed formal fraud disputes with the bank. We contacted the credit bureaus to place fraud alerts on my account. We compiled documentation of everything I'd discovered. And finally, Sandra called the Riverside Police Department to report the crime. They'll send an officer to take your statement, probably within the next few days.
Make sure you bring all of this documentation with you and be prepared to answer a lot of questions about your relationship with your son and when you first suspected something was wrong. As I left the bank 3 hours after I had arrived, I felt emotionally drained but also strangely empowered. The truth was out. The wheels of justice were in motion. Daniel and Vanessa's house of cards was about to come crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do. I drove home and immediately called a locksmith to change all my locks. Paranoid, perhaps, but Daniel had a key to my house, and I didn't want him showing up unannounced if he somehow found out what I was doing. Then I sat down at my computer and did something I'd been avoiding out of some lingering sense of family loyalty. I searched for information about Vanessa's family, specifically her parents, Richard and Patricia Montgomery. It didn't take long to find Richard Montgomery's contact information. His luxury car dealerships were prominently featured online, complete with his personal phone number for VIP clients. I stared at that phone number for a long time, my finger hovering over the call button. Was I really going to do this? Was I going to tell Vanessa's parents that their daughter and son-in-law were thieves? Then I thought about that $177,000 in fraudulent debt. I thought about the years of disrespect and humiliation. I thought about lying on that marble floor when Vanessa laughed. I pressed the call button. Richard Montgomery speaking. His voice was confident, authoritative, the voice of a man used to people wanting something from him. Mr. Montgomery, my name is Margaret Thompson. I'm Daniel's mother, your son-in-law's mother. There was a pause. Oh, hello, Margaret. Is everything all right? Actually, no. Something very serious has come up, and I think you and your wife need to know about it. It concerns Daniel and Vanessa's finances. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of financial matter? The kind that involves identity theft and fraud. Mr. Montgomery, I've just come from the bank where I discovered that Daniel and Vanessa have been opening credit cards and taking out loans in my name without my permission. The fraudulent debt totals over $177,000. I filed a police report, and there's going to be a criminal investigation. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Mr. Montgomery, are you... His voice had changed, become harder. Are you certain about this? You're accusing my daughter of a serious crime. I'm not accusing her of anything she hasn't done. The bank has documentation. The credit card applications used my personal information that only Daniel and Vanessa had access to. The charges are for their lifestyle expenses, furniture for their house, vacations, luxury purchases. This isn't a case of mistaken identity. This is deliberate fraud. I heard muffled voices in the background. Richard was clearly speaking to someone else, probably Patricia. Margaret, I think we need to meet in person to discuss this. Can you come to my office today? Why would I come to your office? Mr. Montgomery, I'm calling as a courtesy to let you know what your daughter has done. I'm not asking for your permission or approval. Nevertheless, he said stilly, if you're going to make accusations like this, I think we should all sit down and discuss it like adults. My daughter's reputation is at stake here, as is my son-in-law's. I'm not just going to take your word that they've committed fraud without hearing their side of the story. I almost laughed. Of course he'd protect his daughter. Of course he'd doubt me, the poor elderly mother-in-law with the shabby house and the outdated clothes. Fine, I said. When and where? My office, today at 4 p.m. I'll have Daniel and Vanessa here too so we can clear this up. Mr. Montgomery, I should tell you, I've already filed a police report. This isn't a family dispute that we can just talk through and resolve. This is a criminal matter. 4 o'clock, Margaret. I'll text you the address. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and anticipation. Richard Montgomery thought he could control this situation, thought he could intimidate me or convince me to drop the charges to protect his daughter's reputation. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I spent the next few hours preparing. I printed out copies of all the bank documents Sandra had given me. I organized my evidence into a clear, chronological timeline. I even wrote out a script of what I wanted to say, in case I got emotional and lost my train of thought. At 3:30 p.m., I got in my car and drove to Montgomery Luxury Motors, Richard's flagship dealership. It was an impressive building, all glass and steel with expensive cars gleaming in the showroom. A far cry from my modest Honda Civic. I parked and walked into the building with my folder of evidence clutched to my chest. A young receptionist directed me to the second floor, to Richard's private office. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Leather furniture, expensive art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the showroom below. Richard sat behind a massive desk, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. Patricia was there too, sitting in one of the leather chairs, looking at me with barely concealed distaste. She was dressed as impeccably as always, her jewelry probably worth more than my car. And there, sitting on the leather sofa like defendants awaiting trial, were Daniel and Vanessa. Daniel looked uncomfortable but defiant. Vanessa looked furious. "Margaret," Richard began, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "please, sit down. Let's discuss this misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding. It's fraud. And I have proof." I opened my folder and pulled out the bank statements Sandra had given me, laying them on Richard's desk one by one. 4 months ago, someone opened a credit card in my name using my personal information. That person made $43,750 in charges. When the bank investigated, they discovered 5 more credit cards opened in my name, plus a $50,000 personal loan. Total fraudulent debt, $177,340. I pulled out more documents. Here are the credit card applications submitted online using my social security number and date of birth. Here are the charges: luxury furniture from Riverside Luxury Furniture, meals at expensive restaurants, a weekend trip to Napa Valley, jewelry purchases, all things I would never buy and could never afford. Richard was examining the documents with growing concern. Patricia had gone pale. "And here," I said, pulling out the final piece of evidence, "is the bank account where the $50,000 loan was deposited. An account at Riverside Community Bank opened in my name, but which I never authorized. An account that Daniel and Vanessa have been using to fund their lifestyle." "This doesn't prove we did anything," Vanessa burst out, her voice shrill. "Anyone could have gotten your information, Margaret. Identity theft happens all the time." I turned to look at her, this woman who had laughed as I lay injured on her floor, and felt nothing but cold determination. "You're right, Vanessa. Identity theft does happen all the time. But you know what's interesting? The credit card applications were submitted from an IP address that traces back to your house. The bank has that information. The activation of the cards was done using security questions that only someone with intimate knowledge of my life could answer. My mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on, my father's middle name, information I've shared with my son over the years." Daniel's face had lost all color. "Mom, I can explain." Don't call me Mom. Don't try to explain. I've already filed a police report. The bank's fraud investigation team has all of this documentation. There's going to be a criminal investigation, and I've been advised by both the bank and the police that I should have no contact with you until this is resolved. "You filed a police report against your own son? What kind of mother does that?" Patricia's voice was filled with disgust. I turned to her. "The kind of mother who was stolen from, the kind of mother who was humiliated and injured at your party while everyone laughed, the kind of mother who refuses to be a doormat anymore." "This is insane," Vanessa said, standing up. "You're going to destroy Daniel's career, his reputation over some credit card charges? We can pay you back. We'll set up a payment plan." "Oh, so you're admitting you did it?" I asked quietly. Vanessa's mouth snapped shut, realizing her mistake. Richard had been reading through the documents, and his expression had shifted from patronizing confidence to genuine concern. "Vanessa, did you do this? Did you open credit cards in Margaret's name?" "Daddy, it's not that simple. We were having some temporary cash flow issues, and we just needed—" "Did you steal from Daniel's mother?" Richard's voice had gone cold. Vanessa looked at her father, then at Daniel, then back at me.
I could see her calculating, trying to find a way out, trying to spin this into something that wasn't her fault. It was supposed to be temporary, she finally said, her voice small. We were going to pay it back before she ever found out. Daniel's bonus was supposed to come through, and we were going to...
You committed fraud, Patricia interrupted, her voice shaking. You opened credit accounts in someone else's name without their permission. Do you have any idea what you've done? To our family's reputation? To your marriage? Our marriage? Daniel spoke up for the first time, his voice bitter. This wasn't just Vanessa's idea, Mother. I went along with it. I provided Mom's information. I activated the cards. I made some of the charges. This is on both of us. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Richard stood up, his face red with anger. Get out, both of you, out of my office. Daddy, Vanessa began. Now! Richard's voice boomed through the office. You've embarrassed this family. You've committed crimes. And you've apparently been living a lifestyle you couldn't afford on stolen money. Get out of my sight while I decide whether I'm going to bail you out of this disaster or let you face the consequences of your actions. Daniel and Vanessa stood up, both looking shell-shocked. As they moved toward the door, Daniel paused and looked at me. Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant for... Don't, I said again. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. They left, and the office fell into heavy silence. Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking much older than he had when I'd arrived. Margaret, I apologize. I had no idea. If I had known they were struggling financially, I would have helped them properly, not like this. They weren't struggling. They were greedy. There's a difference. Daniel makes a good salary. They could have lived comfortably within their means. But they wanted more. They wanted the big house and the luxury cars and the expensive lifestyle. And they didn't care who they hurt to get it. Patricia was crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. What happens now? Now the police investigate, the bank pursues fraud charges, and Daniel and Vanessa face the consequences of their choices. I gathered up my documents and put them back in my folder. I came here today as a courtesy, to let you know what was happening, but I want to be clear. I'm not dropping the charges. I'm not sweeping this under the rug to protect your family's reputation. They stole from me, and they're going to answer for it. Richard nodded slowly. I understand, and for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I love my daughter, but she needs to face consequences for her actions. They both do. As I turned to leave, Richard spoke again. Margaret, the way they treated you at the party. Vanessa told us you'd fallen and been clumsy. She didn't tell us that she'd laughed at you or made you clean up while injured. If I'd known, would you have done anything? I asked, looking back at him. Or would you have made excuses for her, the way you've probably been making excuses for her entitled behavior her whole life? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I left Montgomery Luxury Motors feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth was out. The confrontation was over. Now all that remained was to let justice take its course. The police investigation moved faster than I had expected. Within a week, detectives had gathered enough evidence to file criminal charges against both Daniel and Vanessa. The evidence was overwhelming. The IP addresses, the security question answers that only Daniel could have known, the bank accounts, the charges that clearly benefited their household. They were both arrested on a Friday morning. I heard about it from Sandra at the bank, who had been keeping me updated on the investigation's progress. They've been charged with identity theft, fraud, and theft over $100,000. Those are serious felonies, Margaret. They're looking at significant prison time if convicted. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that the little boy I raised had turned into a man capable of stealing from his own mother.
sad that all my sacrifices and love had led to this moment. But I also felt something else. Relief. The weight of their debt was being lifted from my shoulders. The bank had already removed the fraudulent accounts from my credit report. The stress of wondering if I'd be financially ruined was gone. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Vanessa's interior design business had been completely fake. No real clients, no actual work, just a facade to explain their spending to friends and family. Daniel had been embezzling small amounts from his employer to supplement their income, which got him fired once the investigation revealed his fraud. They had been living entirely on credit, on stolen money, on a foundation of lies. Their perfect life disintegrated in a matter of weeks. Richard Montgomery did end up hiring lawyers for them, expensive lawyers, who managed to negotiate a plea deal. Daniel and Vanessa each pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding trial, which meant they owed me $177,340, plus interest, plus the costs of repairing my credit, plus compensation for the emotional distress they caused.
Richard agreed to pay the restitution on their behalf to keep them out of prison for the full sentence. He was protecting his daughter and son-in-law, but he was also holding them accountable. The money came with strings. They'd have to pay him back with interest, and they'd be cut off from any future financial support until they did. It wasn't perfect justice. Part of me wanted them to serve the full sentence, to truly face the consequences of their actions without their wealthy family bailing them out. But another part of me, the part that was still a mother, despite everything, was relieved that Daniel wouldn't spend years in prison. The restitution payment came through 4 months after I'd filed the initial police report. $177,340 deposited into my bank account with a formal apology letter from Richard Montgomery's lawyers. I stared at that bank balance for a long time. It was more money than I'd ever had in my life, more than I'd earned in years of working double shifts and sacrificing everything for my son. Money that had been stolen from me and was now returned. I could have kept it all. Legally, it was mine. Compensation for what they'd done to me. But that didn't feel right. Instead, I did something that felt more meaningful. I donated $50,000 to a local charity that helped elderly victims of financial fraud and elder abuse. I used another $20,000 to pay off the remainder of my mortgage, so I'd own my little house in Maplewood Heights free and clear. I put $50,000 into a retirement account, ensuring I'd have some financial security in my final years. And I used $10,000 to take a trip, a real vacation, not for anyone else's benefit, but for me. I went to Italy, something Robert and I had always dreamed of doing together but never could afford. I walked the streets of Rome and Florence and Venice, ate incredible food, saw beautiful art, and felt truly free for the first time in decades. The remaining money I kept as an emergency fund, a cushion against future disasters. As for Daniel and Vanessa, I heard through indirect sources that they were living in a small apartment in a less prestigious part of town. Vanessa was working as a receptionist at a real estate office, actual work for the first time in her life. Daniel had found a job as a junior accountant at a small firm, having been blackballed from his previous industry. They were living the kind of modest, struggling existence that I had lived for most of my life. The existence Vanessa had looked down on, the existence they thought they were too good for. It was a harsh lesson, but one they'd needed to learn. Daniel tried to reach out to me several times. Letters, emails, attempts to call. I didn't respond to any of them. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have a relationship with my son again, but that day hasn't come yet. The wound is still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I did, however, receive one letter
that I read all the way through. It came about 6 months after everything had settled, written in Daniel's handwriting on plain notebook paper. "Mom," it began, "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that what Vanessa and I did was unforgivable. We stole from you. We lied to you. We treated you terribly. And we did it all while you were nothing but loving and supportive, even when we didn't deserve it. I've had a lot of time to think about how I became the person who could do those things to his own mother. About how Vanessa and I got so caught up in wanting a certain lifestyle that we lost sight of what actually matters. About how I let my wife's values become my values, even when they went against everything you taught me. I was ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed of our modest house and your secondhand furniture and your working-class life. I wanted to be someone different, someone successful and wealthy and important. And in chasing that image, I became someone I don't even recognize. I'm not expecting you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever want to see me again. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I finally understand what I threw away. I had a mother who loved me unconditionally, who sacrificed everything for me, who would have done anything for me. And I repaid that love with cruelty and theft. I'm trying to become a better person. Vanessa and I are in therapy, trying to understand what went wrong with us. We're working hard at our jobs and living within our means for the first time in our lives. We're learning what actually matters. But even if I spend the rest of my life being a better person, it won't undo what I did to you. It won't give back the years of disrespect and the pain we caused. It won't erase the moment when you fell at our party and I cared more about the floor than about my own mother. I love you, Mom. I always have, even when I was too lost to show it properly. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your son, Daniel. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the pain or the betrayal, but it was something. A starting point, maybe, for some distant future reconciliation. Or maybe not. Maybe some wounds are too deep to fully heal. For now, I'm focused on my own life, my own healing, my own future. I'm 70 years old, and for the first time in decades, I'm truly living for myself. I have financial security, I have my dignity back, I have self-respect. I've even made some new friends, other women my age who meet for coffee and book clubs and who treat me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings are important. I'm not the clumsy old woman who fell on Vanessa's marble floor anymore. I'm not the unpaid servant or the embarrassing mother or the easy victim. I'm Margaret Rose Thompson. I'm a survivor. I'm a woman who stood up for herself and demanded justice. I'm someone who refused to be diminished by people who should have valued me most.
And that's worth more than any expensive house or luxury car or perfect party could ever be. 1 year later. It's been a year since that terrible night at Vanessa's party. A year since I fell on that marble floor and my life changed forever. I'm sitting in my little house in Maplewood Heights, the house that Vanessa once looked at with such disdain, but which is now truly mine, mortgage-free. The morning sun streams through my kitchen window, and I'm drinking coffee from a mug I bought myself in Florence. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's from a number I don't recognize, but the message makes me smile. Mrs. Thompson, this is Sandra from First National Bank. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I think about your case often. You were so brave to stand up for yourself. I hope life is treating you well. Sandra. I text back. I'm doing wonderfully, Sandra. Thank you for everything you did to help me. You gave me my life back." And it's true. She did. By believing me, by helping me navigate the fraud investigation, by treating me with respect and dignity, Sandra helped me reclaim not just my financial identity, but my sense of self-worth. I look around my modest kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel did his homework as a child, where I baked countless birthday cakes and holiday meals, where I sat alone so many nights wondering how to pay the bills. It's not fancy. It's not impressive. But it's mine, and I love it. My laptop is open on the table, and I've been working on something new. A blog about my experience, offering advice and support to other elderly people who've been victims of financial fraud by family members. It turns out I'm not alone in what happened to me. Hundreds of thousands of older Americans are victimized by their own children and relatives every year. If sharing my story can help even one person recognize the warning signs and protect themselves, then something good will have come from all this pain. There's a knock at my door, and I get up to answer it. It's Helen, a woman in her late 60s, who I've become friends with over the past year. "Ready for our walk?" she asks, smiling. "Absolutely," I say, grabbing my jacket. We walk through the neighborhood together, chatting about everything and nothing. Helen knows my story. Everyone in the neighborhood does after it made the local news, but she doesn't define me by it. She sees me as Margaret, not as a victim or someone to be pitied. As we walk, I think about how different my life is now compared to a year ago, how much lighter I feel without the weight of Daniel and Vanessa's expectations and demands, how much happier I am living a simple life surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, rather than people who see me as useful or convenient. I think about the expensive parties I used to help with, feeling out of place and diminished, and I compare them to the potluck dinners I now have with Helen and other neighbors, where everyone contributes what they can and nobody judges anybody for having less. I think about the massive house in Riverside Estates with its Italian marble floors, and I compare it to my small house with its worn carpet and dated kitchen, and I realize that I wouldn't trade places for anything. Because this house holds genuine memories. This house represents honest work and real values. This house is where I raised my son with love, even if he lost his way as an adult. My phone rings. It's an unknown number, but I answer anyway. "Is this Margaret Thompson?" A woman's voice, nervous and hesitant. "Yes, this is Margaret." "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Carol. I found your blog about family financial fraud. I think my daughter and son-in-law are doing something similar to what happened to you. I'm scared and I don't know what to do." And just like that, I have a purpose, a way to turn my painful experience into something that helps others. "Carol," I say gently, "tell me what's been happening. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." As I listen to her story, so painfully similar to my own, I feel a deep sense of gratitude, not for what happened to me, but for what I learned from it, about my own strength, about the importance of self-respect, about the difference between being used and being valued. Daniel and Vanessa thought they could use me and discard me. They thought I was too old, too unsophisticated, too powerless to fight back. They learned otherwise. And now, with each person I help through my blog and support group, I'm proving that being a victim doesn't mean staying a victim, that age doesn't equal weakness, that dignity and self-worth are more valuable than any amount of money or status. I'm 71 years old now. I don't have wealth or prestige or a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, but I have something better.
I have my integrity. I have my self-respect. I have genuine relationships with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that when I was tested, when I had to choose between accepting mistreatment and standing up for myself, I chose myself. That night at Vanessa's party, when I fell on that marble floor and she laughed, something inside me broke. But from that broken place, something stronger grew. I found my voice. I found my power. I found myself. And that is the greatest gift that could have come from such a painful experience. To everyone watching this story, especially those who've experienced similar betrayals from family members, you are not alone. You are not powerless. You deserve respect and dignity, regardless of your age or financial situation.